Good morning and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Megan Sneeman and I'm the Venture Relations Manager at Stakeholders, and I have the privilege of meeting with founders of new businesses every week looking to raise funds. I'm delighted you can join us this morning to understand how you can harness the power of your network to grow your business. Joining me today is an incredibly well-connected man, and over the next 45 minutes, Ollie Barrett will be going over some networking essentials that can instantly help you grow your business, support you through that journey. If you have questions for Ollie, as always, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get through as many of those as we can during the session. So let me introduce you to our guest today. Ollie Barrett, you describe yourself as a serial co-founder, but you seem to be working on lots of different projects at the moment. You've also been described as the most connected man in Britain. So can you tell me a little bit more about yourself, what you do, how you came to be so good at making and, more importantly, keeping the connections you make?
Well, thank you, Megan. What a lovely introduction. Good morning. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you. You look like you're flying Air Force One there. This is great. I'm loving the
I think
stakeholders.
it's the blue.
It's awesome. And good morning to you tuning in. Thank you for joining us. So a huge fan of this community. And as soon as Dermot Hill called me and told me about this morning, I was like, count me in. I'd love to. I'm so lucky, Megan. I get to do a variety of things. I'm sure audience members relate to that. I wear a number of hats. By background, I'm a serial co-founder. I love helping start things, never on my own. Some have been companies. One of the first was a language practice website, a bit like Pen Pals Online, with a brilliant entrepreneur, Simon Murdoch, and that was sold in 2008. Even before that, I dropped out of a couple of unis, starting my first companies. Today I'm a shareholder in several businesses, including Calm.com. You might know the meditation and mindfulness business based out of San Francisco. Troubadour Theatres, which is creating these amazing new live entertainment and film studio spaces around the world, and quite a few other companies that I've had a role in helping along the way. I'm also someone who enjoys starting, I'd say non-commercial entities. Some of the kids or nieces and nephews of the audience might have done a scheme called Tenor, where we give now, gosh, almost 500,000 kids £10, and they have a month to turn it into something. And that's a scheme I started probably 14, 15 years ago. It spawned Fiverr, probably during austerity, for primary school kids, 50,000 kids a year doing that. And I helped start Startup Britain with Number 10, just trying to give people a hand up just when they were starting out for the first time. So I guess, Megan, that's the sort of entrepreneurial bit in the background. And today I'm lucky enough to help host quite a few things secretly, because I love meeting people, to be honest. So the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, I co-host the London Business Awards. I'm on the board of the Tech London Advocates. So love working with entrepreneurs, love seeing companies start up and scale up, and absolutely love spotting and making useful connections. So I don't really need any excuse to do that, because I'm so lucky to keep meeting people. So as you might imagine, it's been a strange old year.
Absolutely. Before we get into the poll, I just wanted to pick up on something you took. You talked about all the companies you've been involved in, the startups you've been involved in. How do you decide which companies to either get involved in, or how did your ideas come to you? I know a lot of entrepreneurs sort of fail along the way. So, what drew you to the specific projects and companies that you've been involved in?
Yeah, and on fail along the way, cards on the table. My first business straight out of uni was a spectacular financial failure, despite looking hugely successful, I might add, and hugely familiar with the bumps along the road. I mean, I have a few areas I'm particularly passionate about. So I'm interested in education. I'm interested in health, although I'm not a shareholder in many health companies at the moment. And I'm interested in clean tech, green tech, sustainable technology. The really honest answer, Megan, is it often comes down to the relationship and the chemistry and the feeling I get when I spend time with the founding teams. I've got a lot better actually at marking people's card and saying, look, it sounds a bit cryptic, but I might say that I don't know when or how this might be, but I'd love to work with you at some point. And just making that little mental note in someone else's mind has really helped, because actually, guess what? Several years later, we're shareholders in a company together. I'm helping them in other ways. So I think it's chemistry. I think it's caring about the big problem they're trying to solve. And I think, frankly, am I great at saying no to things? No. So it's thinking, are there other ways I might be able to help along the way by keeping in touch with them that don't involve committing time and energy every week and every day?
So interesting. I'm really excited to get into these questions with you and to pick your brain. Before we do, I'd love to launch a poll for the audience. You should see it pop up on your screen now. And if you could just choose one answer, the poll is, what is the hardest part about networking remotely? So if the audience can indicate their choice, is it reading body language, feeling nervous about being on screen, tech issues with poor connection? Is it home life distractions? Knowing how to start a conversation in an unnatural environment? Or it feels less important when it's remote, so you make less effort? So let's see what everyone is saying, and we can have a quick chat about that. I see everyone is voting and putting their votes down, and it's changing up on the screen. I always love seeing polls to get an idea of what people are thinking while people are voting. Ollie, I love the idea of your the Tenor business, and I'm seeing actually a lot of ventures coming up focusing on developing children in various sectors, like your maths, your science, but also in entrepreneurial skills. And so talk to me a little bit about that area.
Well, I think sometimes when people think about schools and entrepreneurship, they think, oh, that would be good. Could we dress them all in suits and give them a little briefcase and we'll take a photo like The Apprentice? And I don't really think of it like that at all. I think it's got to be far more creative. It's about helping them to have ideas and make them happen. And let's be honest, a lot of the school experience, and this is no disrespect to the amazing teachers across the world, but a lot of the school experience can be quite passive, sitting, listening. And so I think if we get kids more active, and funny enough, my friend Daniel Priestley has just co-authored a book with Jodie Cook about raising entrepreneurial kids, which I ought to read actually, but which fascinates me. So I think how to have ideas and make them happen is essential. And we could be seeding that throughout the whole curriculum. The other thing is, I don't think you want kids leaving school thinking they're in the passenger seat of their own life. And that they're ready to be driven somewhere, So I think any activities we can put into schools, this is to say nothing of the financial literacy and all the other things this could encompass, anything we can do that gets them thinking they're in the driving seat of their own life has to be a good thing. So in a way, I don't see Tenor as a business competition. It's more about ideas, creativity, being active, coming alive. So hopefully that makes sense. And I've had some amazing letters from parents over the years saying, honestly, since my child did Tenor, I've seen a totally different child. And that's a lovely thought, given it's such a simple idea that the kids pick up and run with.
Absolutely, just about thinking differently. Okay, let's close this poll. I see majority of people have voted, and share the results. So the number one, the hardest part about networking, our audience feels at the moment, is reading body language.
Yeah.
41% of the audience feel that is the hardest thing. So Ali, what are your comments on that?
I'm quite surprised, actually. It's a great point, and I've got to be honest, Megan, I've not got a little list of things around reading body language. I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is what might be behind that. I don't know, people will tell me in the conversation later on, is what is this person thinking versus what they're saying? And I think that gets sometimes tangled up with issues. That sounds a bit deep, but it gets tangled up with the subject of trust and knowing whether we've connected with somebody. Because if we're worrying about their body language, I'm probably wondering, have I actually connected with Megan? And so I would think to myself, what is the scope within reason? And this could apply to the guest, but of course it could apply to the companies they invest in and support. What is the capacity, if any, to have a non-agenda warm-up to a meeting? And Megan, just by spending 5 or 10 minutes with you backstage, we were able, weren't we, to find so many interesting mutual connections, things that interested us about our lives, our families, our work. And actually, it makes me far less likely to wonder at any given moment whether you've connected with me, because we've had that opportunity. So hopefully just a thought starter there, because I find if you found something to bond over, that could be mutual connections, subjects of interest, places you want to go, experiences, actually you start to erase some of those fears around body language from that conversation. So hopefully that's a thought starter.
So that's I guess, a bit of advice in terms of when you're having meetings and remote meetings now, how to start them instead of delving straight into what you're trying to get out of the meeting or the point. Spend a few minutes in the beginning, just warming up to the person, and having that sort of friendly conversation.
I think it's crucial. And funny enough, a lot of the headhunters I'm speaking to about the work they're doing are actively budgeting in so much more time into their meetings. I also think there can be a bit of a tyranny of having to have an agenda for every call. So creating those spaces around a meeting before and after, to riff a bit, to shoot the breeze. It might sound like a bit of an indulgence, but actually that could be the moment that you connect most of all. I think the other elephant in the room, Megan, is that very often people are a bit distracted, aren't they? So I think not being afraid to say, I'm terribly sorry, someone's just come to the door, or barely made it on time because of course I've just had to start homeschool at 10 o'clock every morning, or whatever it was. It sort of humanizes people, because we're all going through something, aren't we, this year?
Absolutely. I want to also just quickly touch on the one that came in second. It feels less important when it's remote, so you make less effort. And in fact, it's probably even more important, I don't know, to be aware of networking when we can't physically be with one another. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great point, and there was big red letters on the screen when I saw it. It said, panelists and guests aren't allowed to vote, but I would have probably voted that one myself, and that's because I have to remind myself that when you hear that word networking, and we're going to come on to it being a dirty word and why that might be, but it does remind me that a lot of people think it just means meeting new people. And in fact, for me, 90% of networking is about keeping in touch with the people we already know. And so what can happen is we start to close off meeting new people. And before we know it, January's set in, and it's been quite a long month of about 180 days. And not only have we stopped meeting new people, we've also stopped checking in with the people we already know. And so I think it can spiral a little bit if we're not careful.
Okay, so let's delve straight into the questions then, Ali. Networking, as you said, is often seen as a dirty word. Why is that, and how do you see it?
I think it's got a terrible reputation. I mean, when I get interviewed or introduced as well connected, that can be very flattering. But if somebody says Ollie's a great networker, I always think that might mean Ollie's a bit of a twit, really. It sounds quite self-serving. Somebody swanning around a stuffy room with a fistful of business cards, sort of frisbeeing them out to people without a care in the world, no real care about who you're connecting with and why. Also, I think that certain events, with all due respect to organisers around the world, have got such a bad reputation as just not being that good as places to meet new people. It can all seem a bit random. Why am I here? I probably should have stayed in and caught the last bit of the Queen's Gambit instead. And so I don't think that does it any favours. And I think if you're not careful, it's seen in isolation, without context of what it really is. And what it really is building up a group of people who you can support and who can support you, and thinking in interesting ways about how those people fit together. For me, that's what a network is. And doing it that way makes it far more interesting, actually. And when somebody asks, well, why though? Why would you want an effective network? For me, it boils down to two things, and I think these might resonate with our guest this morning. One is, very simply, it helps you to make things happen. If you try to make something happen and at every stage you're wading through treacle because you have to build up new relationships, new trust, it's so frustrating. So having a warm network of lawyers, accountants, investors, advisors, entrepreneurs, journalists all around the world who are happy to take your call and pleased to hear from you and want to help you, just makes everything a bit easier. That's the first thing. The second bit, I think, is it magnetizes you for opportunities. If you've got an effective network that knows where you're going, knows what you're doing, knows what you want to do, you're much more likely to have your inbox pinging with cool and interesting opportunities on a daily basis. And I think both of those things, I might be unusual, but both of those things get me really, make me feel really positive about it.
It's interesting because I think initially when you think of networking, you think of looking outward. But is there strength and more to do in networking within your own organization?
Absolutely. And I think that thinking on the one hand, facing out, and don't forget, every person you meet, you're effectively standing at the gateway to everybody they know. So that's kind of a mind-blowing thought in itself. And by by the same token, they have potential access to everybody you know when they meet. Taking the trouble to curate your network, to keep in touch with it, and we'll talk lots about that, and also to make connections within your own organization. I mean, one of my favorite things, obviously at physical events as well, is saying, do you know Dermot over there? And it's amazing. Dermot's a bad example because everyone knows Dermot, but it's amazing to me how often someone will say, no, I don't actually. And I said, well, would you like me to introduce you? I think you'll get on. And, in a physical world, it's strolling across the room and making that connection and then leaving them to it. And I think it can apply virtually. The most amazing thing happened over the years. I was hosting speed networking events, which sound horrific, including in Johannesburg, where I would literally bring a whistle and I'd say a few things at the start about how awful it sounded. I'd blow the whistle every 3 minutes. They'd have 3-minute conversations. But rather than sounding terribly shallow, it was actually quite a good way of getting everyone going to then have more normal conversations afterwards. And the point of the story is, so often people would come up to me after the event and say, that is very strange because I've just met someone I've worked in the same organization as for 10 years and we'd never talked.
Wow.
It just fascinates me to think of the hidden, unmade connections that sit all around us and say, I wonder if we could do something about that.
Absolutely. Ollie, what are some of the ways you can get your network then to work for you?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I think what I would do is bear in mind that, and this goes back to some research in, I think, the 1970s, Stanford University, Mark Granovetter did some research around what he called the strength of weak ties. So what he found was that, yes, opportunities get to people through other people, but more intriguingly, they tend to come through people we don't know very well. And he called those our weak ties. And it can seem very natural to go to our best mates and colleagues and co-workers for the answers, but just to bear in mind that the answer is more likely to come from somebody we haven't spoken to for a while or we're not quite as familiar with. Why? Because the people close to us tend to know the people and things that we know. So I think just as a frame to answer your question, it's useful to think about the strength of weak ties. How we harness the power of our network, I think, depends on two things. Firstly, the ability to keep in touch, which we will come on to, but also not to be afraid to share in various different ways what you're up to. What are your latest plans and projects? One of the failings, I think, of, let's say, LinkedIn or how people use it is people tend to just talk about what they're doing today and what they've done yesterday and the days before. Why don't we talk a bit more about where we want to go, that we want to explore Japan, that we want to learn more about EdTech, for example? I think if we did that a little more, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call do that, but I've just noticed that as soon as you start throwing out those little hooks into the future, it's amazing who picks up on them and says, well, there's a roundtable about EdTech tomorrow, you should tune in, for example. So I think it's throwing things out about where we want to go. And the related point to that, particularly on harnessing your network, I think, is asking better questions, asking open questions to your network about what they're doing at the moment, what's keeping them busy, who they need to meet, where they want to go. And if you ask more of those questions, you'll get more clues, which will help you help people more. So for me, that becomes a very virtuous circle.
Such great tips, Ollie. I want to pick up on you mentioned the strength of weak ties. So, your perhaps colder network. Then, how do you get in contact with them? Do cold calls and emails work? What are the best techniques to then tap into that colder network?
Well, first of all, on the weak ties, there I'm particularly talking about people that you already know, but
Yes.
maybe don't know as well or haven't seen for some time, and you might want to bring them closer to your the center of your network, if you like, to strengthen those ties. So that's where I was sort of heading on the weak ties. At the risk of being quite controversial or provocative, I think that long shots, as I call them, emails in particular to people you've never met, and frankly might never ever get back to you, do work if done well. And I've got some practical thoughts on that. And the reason I think that is, when I started my first company, Leeds University, sitting on the floor of my student bedroom, didn't know anyone, needed some advice about an advertising campaign, and I sent off. And in fact, it was much older than that, because I went through directory inquiries on the telephone. Not sure I'd recommend that these days. But cut a long story short, I wanted some advice about advertising, and I called up Saatchi & Saatchi, and weirdly got through to the global marketing director, who helped me. And that led to investment. It led to him giving me a secret office in their building in London, and it led to introducing me to their clients. So it just planted a seed going, well, maybe from time to time. And if I think back to all of the companies and campaigns I've helped to start, I think almost without exception, they've started by me sending some form of message, a letter, an email, to someone that I thought might ignore me, and good things have happened. So I think a well-crafted, well-timed email, particularly, can be really powerful.
And do you have any extra tips on what you should be putting in that email?
I did, and I've downloaded all these recently because, as I will explain, I've been putting together a course on this, and I thought, what are my top tips about how to craft an email that someone will respond to? And by the way, someone tuning in this morning might think, well, look, not my style. So maybe I'm thinking of the people that they support and invest in. So very briefly, my top tips are make it personal. I don't just mean Dear Megan. Use a recent Google search to find something recent in the last week or month about the individual, because what the person's wondering straight away is this in any way for me? Or is this email just being sent to hundreds of people? And if they suspect the latter, delete, isn't it? So how do you mega personalize it? If I was writing to Alex, who runs Channel 4 today, it wouldn't be, congratulations on running Channel 4, but it might be, congratulations on your fantastic new show, which I've really been enjoying. So make it personal. Your two challenges in an email, right at the top of the email, are how do you build trust, and then how do you build credibility? One way to build trust really quickly is to use a name or phrase that, and what's the name of that show on Channel 4, Megan? Have you been watching it?
No.
Someone will tell us in a minute. It's about AIDS in the 80s. It's meant to be absolutely amazing, and I want to sit down and watch it this week. But I would go to the trouble of, and by the way, it would not be right to say, "Isn't that brilliant?" when you haven't seen it. I do accept that. It's a Sin. That's the name of it. Pet Shop Boys song. So if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't say I had, but I would say, congratulations on the huge success of It's a Sin. So I'm automatically personalized to her at this week in history. Trust, use a name or phrase or organization that they are familiar with. You might remember we met at an event the Times ran in Leeds last year. So it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't have to be something that connects you and them. Yeah, it could be several friends of mine grew up in Johannesburg, for example. Yeah, so you're using a name or phrase that starts to build trust on quite a subconscious level. Then credibility. How can you, without terribly name dropping, how do you get in very early on in the note your credentials? Yeah, So already you've personalized it, you've started to build trust, and you've got some creds. Is this a joker, or is this somebody that's got something in their track record that makes me go, gosh, I'm a serial angel investor in companies including bang, whatever it happens to be. Yeah. The final couple of thoughts would be keep it brief. The curse of the long email either sits there unanswered, gets deleted. The way to make a long email, by the way, look like a short email is put more information under the signature. So the actual top of it is very snappy. It makes it easier to reply to. But be patient about it. Too many people propose on that first date. I can't get my head around it. Instead, pace yourself. Make the first note one to gauge interest, to attract attention. Would it be all right to contact you in this way on this email, right? Now, when I'm going through all these tips, an audience member might be thinking, oh, these are all my pet hates. I can't stand it when someone does it to me. So it's important to say, use your own style, experiment. Don't forget, particularly if you're coaching, people getting started in business, very often these long shots just get ignored. So I'm going to say something equally provocative, which is I believe that it's all right, and this will inflame some people, to send that note again and potentially again, only because some of the most amazing results I've had have come through sending something 3 times. And eventually someone comes back. The final thought, and I know we've got more to explore, Megan, is timing. Are there particular points of the day, 7 till 8 in the morning, 10 till 11 at night, when the rush hour is past and there might be an opportunity to ping into someone's radar screen? But also timing. Think about pacing yourself over the shorter, medium, longer term with when you're going to connect with someone. And what I do, might sound weird, is I have a whole range of free Google alerts set up on certain people and organizations. So when they enter the news or media in a new way, I get a free email. So if I set up one this morning on Dermot Hill at Stakeholders with a Z, Dermot's presence or activity will ping an email to me, and that I can use as a trigger or a lever for a piece of communication. In other words, what would have been a random email, hopefully not random after this morning's gathering on a Tuesday morning, goes from a really nicely timed note straight after he's done a column in the FT or has won another award. So it might sound a bit cunning, but when I put all of those into action and encourage others to do that, honestly, the results, you can see a 10x on the notes you're sending.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. And you mentioned that you have recently brain dumped all your incredible thoughts on and advice about networking. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes, it was very flattering. I was being asked to go and do workshops and seminars called what was called at the time, how to build a more effective network. And I was going to, companies like Pret and Marks and Spencers and private equity firms and banks, several banks. And very nice. I enjoyed it, but I thought, actually, how do I distill this without writing a book, which wasn't particularly something I was in the mood for? Might sound a bit grand. How do I just distill everything I've learned? How do I get the tips from some of the best connectors I know, like Lord Billamoria from Cobra Beer, like Michael from Calm.com, like Dame Julia Cleverdon from Teach First and Business in the Community, and weave them together? So anyway, that's what I did over 6 months last year when I could have been baking sourdough. But on a serious note, it was a really useful exercise for me to put it into a 12-part audio course. Build a Better Network, it's called, or Build a Better.network, which is out there. Firstly, because I want more people around the world to access the course. So it's on sale, has been since last month. But also because I've been giving certain scholarships to the course to people who have either lost their job, haven't got started in the workplace. Because actually, it's all very well for us to sit around mulling around how to harness our network. But if you haven't got a network in the first place, then it can be really difficult. So it's sort of a bit of a double whammy, really. And so that's why I did the course.
Brilliant. And I think people will be getting information on how to get a hold of that course after the webinar today. We actually just had a comment on the discussion we had previously. This gentleman has said, I get inundated with cold call emails. They are becoming very persistent and can be annoying. I delete them very quickly, so the compelling text needs to be in the first line.
Wow, it's brutal and absolutely right. Absolutely right. So I think, and that's why I put my caveats as I was explaining it. But I think the other thing is, I mean, life can be a bit like a sort of train journey where sometimes you're rushing through tunnels and everything's very focused. And then you come out of the tunnel into the countryside with the blue sky around, and you open your mind to those new opportunities. So this isn't in any way a criticism of our questioner, who's completely right. It's totally overwhelming, right? Especially, by the way, if you've if you've been talking about connecting for the last few years, you get a few emails coming in, and so I think to myself, what could this connection lead to? Is it an opportunity for me to help someone else? Is it a new opportunity for me? Is it one I might triage, if you like, to another part of my network? And what are the ways I can channel shift? And again, this is, veering on sucking eggs territory for some of the guests, but how do I channel switch quite effectively, saying no to a coffee or a Zoom, but potentially yes to either answering 3 quick questions? By the way, when I ask people 3 non-trick basic questions about the email they've sent me, 3 out of 5 never come back. Very strange, but that's the reality. Or is it my secret weapon, which is bringing people together? So becoming a host. So I, from time to time, will gather people physically, virtually. And that can be a really nice way to say, look, I can't spend the time to look at your deck or your pitch proposal, but what I can do is invite you along next time I gather some people. And of course, there's the chance for me to bump into them then, and they get to meet all the other guests.
Such great advice. Ollie, we are obviously in a virtual world now. So, how can we get more from virtual events?
Yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming, can't it? I think firstly, go back to the point. Why am I going to these events? Is it to do deals? Is it to open my mind? Is it to learn more about a new sector? So I guess broaden the focus rather than then reviewing them, going not a single lead, annoying, rather than going, well, did I learn something? Did it change my thinking about something? Don't be afraid to time travel to explore. So, we could go to a breakfast in Singapore tomorrow, or a drinks online in Oslo. And there are great platforms like Eventbrite where you can explore the world in that. Ask great questions when you're on the platforms, because that can start to raise your profile within virtual events. Be aware that there are certain connecting services springing up, like Lunch Club would be one that a friend's invested in, which literally pairs people up for spontaneous lunch dates, if you like. And again, some people will be thinking, well, why would I do that? Why would I have time for that? But actually, again, if you don't see it as a chance to do a deal, maybe that encounter with a young entrepreneur from Paris, whatever, just changes your day in some way. So I find that intriguing. And don't forget that behind every event is a potentially helpful super connector host who can help you further down the line. So there's a thought there. My final thought is, it can involve a bit of detective work, but don't be afraid to join the dots between the platforms. So whether that's LinkedIn, Twitter, increasingly Clubhouse, the audio only drop-in social network, join the dots. So if you've seen an interesting person, don't be afraid to remark on that. Using their LinkedIn or through the Twitter, updates for the event. So that might sound like a bit of a faff, but actually, everyone's time is very precious. You've taken the time to tune into this. It just might be that the person who's asking a question is a like mind and just someone to bear in mind, not for an immediate virtual coffee, but for the bigger picture. So those are my practical virtual event tips.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got one more question, and then I'm going to go to the questions from the audience. How do you then keep track of connections, and how do you use social media to build a better network?
Yeah, so the first thing is, I'm a serial co-founder, and that's why, whether it's TOTS, the literacy campaign, turn on the subtitles if you want to improve your kids' reading, that has a co-founder, Henry Warren. So does VIY, Kids Fixing Their Own Youth Clubs, co-founded by Tim and Ed. So the first thing is, I try to support the people around me to build better networks. Now that sounds a bit like a get out. Now I say it, but I'm serious, because if you think, how can you support your portfolio to build better networks? then you don't have to work quite as hard on their behalf. So there's certainly something in that. I don't have the database spreadsheet, I'm afraid, sitting in a volcano to end all spreadsheets. I do use a number of complementary products. I happen to be on Android, so using Google Contacts and so on, Gmail can really help me find people and put people together. I supercharge my network by making powerful, what I think are powerful introductions. So every week I will introduce several pairs of people, never spontaneously because it can cram into someone's day too much, but by listening to who they are and where they're trying to go and making those introductions. So I try and supercharge it like that. The low tech answer is, Megan, and this is going to be awful for the techies, but I use a blank sheet of paper and I have these. And what I will do is I will take time over a coffee to map out a part of my network. If I was thinking about COP26 in Glasgow in November, I'd start to think, doesn't Gordon Merrilees, head of entrepreneurship in NatWest, have a base in Glasgow? What about the Great British Entrepreneur Awards? They must have some finalists. And these would go on my page, the Clean and Cool mission, which I started, taking scale-up entrepreneurs to Silicon Valley. What about James from James Highgate or Daniel from Buffalo? Anyway, and I would actually start to map on a piece of paper. And what that does to my brain is it reminds me who to keep back in touch with. It reminds me of potential connections within the network. And then it spurs my creative part of my brain to start thinking about the ventures I'm engaged in. So apologies for the awfully low-tech bit of the answer, but it is one of my favorite ways to keep in touch with people. Cup of coffee, blank sheet of paper.
That is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to jump into some of the questions that have come in from the audience, Ollie. The first question is, someone has said, as a kinesthetic learner, I struggle with not being able to see, feel, touch, smell the situation. So how do you manage that when you're trying to network?
Well, some people will not be missing the smell of networking events. We should just say that. No, I relate to that totally. So I try to switch more of my meetings to walks, which can offend people if they have taken the time to be in a quiet space and you're yomping through the woods. So maybe a consensus, should we do this as a walk, can really work. So I like to move and think and talk. I find actually with screens, you're looking too close to you too much of the time. By the way, if you don't like looking at yourself on Zoom, you can hide self-view, which is brilliant. And then you disappear after you've made sure the shot's set up. So that can help a lot of people, certainly cheers me up. And the other thing I do is so on the walking, don't be afraid to flick between audio and video. So increasingly people are doing, not that I take offense, but a video call for the first couple of minutes, just to get everyone's head in the game, and then you flick to audio. But I totally relate. So I think more walking, but also call it out and say, look, I'm finding these tricky, but also sourcing ideas from all around, because I've shared a couple of tips this morning, but everyone's got little ways of working in these new environments. So let's harness them and let's ask people what makes it work for them. Okay.
As an introvert, how do you get over or manage networking if you are introverted, but you realize the importance of networking?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that networking is, sometimes about connecting with new people, and it's also about that fostering of the relationships you already have. So this isn't me about to become an expert on introversion or extroversion, but I think what I notice is the best networkers, if I can put it that way, realize that it's not actually about them. It is about supporting other people, and very often that can be about pointing to other things. So I'm often WhatsApp exchanging with somebody who I hope wouldn't mind me saying is very introverted, and yet their ability to spot gems and point them out to me and to others is amazing. Having been interviewed by a few people over the years, the thought and sensitivity of the interview was, excellent. So I think, recognizing your ability to join dots, and recognizing that within any room, however brash it might seem, there will be a huge number, probably more people than you think, that frankly don't want to be there. that struggle with it a bit. And I've met people on the boards of billion-dollar companies who feel exactly like this. And it's just not being afraid to accept that, and recognizing that, and there will be different experiences in the audience on this, but recognizing that giving something a go can help it improve remarkably quickly if you dip your toe.
Okay, thanks, Ali. I've got a few more questions, and then I'm just going to remind the audience that we will open this up and give everybody an opportunity to chat and network a little bit together, as this is a networking event. Before we do that, I have a question from Tim. He says, Ollie, I'm interested that you mention Clubhouse, as I've just been asked to join up. What advice can you give on networking in that environment? Is there a newbie guide?
Yeah, there is actually. There's a brilliant person called Sarah Esser, Sarah S-A-R-A, Esser, E-S-S-A, and she has written, if you look her up on LinkedIn, she has written, we can include this in the show notes, a really good 10-point guide. Also, Daniel Priestley, I've mentioned him a couple of times, has written an interesting guide for entrepreneurs on Clubhouse. So I'm pointing you towards other resources. Clubhouse is currently only available on iPhone. I've snuck onto my other half's iPhone to give it a whirl. It's audio only. It was set up last May. It's getting huge valuations, and I think the first thing is, well, my motto is don't knock it till you've tried it. So find a way to give it a go. There will be a bit of a race for name real estate, a bit like when you realized your name was gone on Twitter or whatever. So you can get your name reserved. So do that, because then if it turns out to be nothing, you've wasted 2 minutes, haven't you? But if it doesn't, then you've got your own name. I think recognize that it's a chance to explore, to listen in to voices you wouldn't otherwise have encountered. But frankly, if you could sit quietly and listen to some health tech entrepreneurs riffing in Kenya this afternoon about the challenges they're facing, wouldn't that be interesting in a way that might have cost you so much more time and energy beforehand? So I think the audio only provides a new take. I'd encourage people to give it a go. And I think that's it for now. I'm in no way the Clubhouse expert. I've dipped my toe. I'm intrigued. For me, I see it as a weird combination of podcasts with a highly interactive audience. So tuning in weirdly for me was this strange frisson that you don't get tuning into radio or telly, because if you want to appear on stage and speak on radio, you've got to call in, haven't you, or text in. Whereas in Clubhouse, in theory, you can put up your hand, and before you know it, it's saying, Megan, tell us your take on this. And that, in a way, that's a bit exciting. Will it be a bit like bubblegum that loses its flavor after a few weeks? I don't know. Watch this space. I'd love to hear what others think.
Okay. Thanks, Ali. Another question here. How regularly do you follow up with your connections? Do you split them into groups of very important or less important? And do you dedicate a specific time for follow up with them? I have a number of cold connections, but never dedicate time to follow up with them.
Yeah, I think this is a real challenge. By the way, I don't chew bubblegum for several weeks. I do want to make that absolutely clear. We've got all sorts of thoughts circulating off the back of this event. I think it's difficult. I think rather than dedicate time to networking, I try and develop certain habits. So, for example, every day I start my day, again, good old blank sheet of paper, but I map out what's going on that day. But strangely, names, maybe it's just the way my brain works, names will fall out of my head onto the page of people that causes me to think about. And I just have a little check-in list. So I might say check in with Paul from Ella's Kitchen, or Michael Linus, ex-National Citizen Service. Particular check-in opportunities come when someone's transitioning, and I talk about a lot of this in the course. My grandparents met at a dance when there was no DJ mixing the songs, and that silence meant they could meet because the dance ended before the next one started. And the reason I'm giving you that strange analogy is, if you spot someone that is transitioning or about to transition in their career, that could be an amazing chance to have that 10-minute Zoom or phone call to catch up what's on their mind. How can you support them in their next role? So don't be afraid to let some of those thoughts fall out of your mind about connecting with them. On habits, when I see what I think is an interesting article or even tweet, I make a resolution to share it with 1, 2, 3 people. I saw this and I thought of you. And by the way, I triple the number of people that come back to me when I use the phrase, no need to reply. So I do that as well. So already I've started building a few habits into my day that before I know it, I've sent to, whoever it might be, Jacqueline de Rocas, president of Tech UK. I saw this piece and I thought of you. And all of a sudden, I've gone from being out of touch to just slightly back in touch. Does it lead to an exchange? Not always. So I think, how can you build those habits back in? And by the way, if there's someone you've fallen out of touch with, you feel a bit guilty, don't be afraid to call it out. I feel terrible. It's been years. I've been awful at keeping back in touch. I can't believe it was 19, whatever it was, when we last crossed paths. I sparked up a conversation with someone I hadn't seen since I was 6 years old recently on LinkedIn. It genuinely made my day. I thought, that can't be the same, Parry Dillon. And of course it was. And we had a wonderful exchange. So it's never too late to get back in touch, but call it out, be human. There's a human on the other end. No one's ever written back and said, how dare you? How dare you write to me? Even with those pesky cold called emails, they'll ignore it. And eventually they might say, look, this is not one for me. But actually, we're professionals. And if this isn't something for us, we know how to say it.
Would you suggest then that you should actually, as you're starting out and getting back into networking again, setting aside time in your day to focus on the networking activities until it becomes easier for you, perhaps more of a habit that can drop in and out your day?
I can imagine that working as a segue back into it, a bit like a sort of retired athlete sort of getting back into training. I think my point about habits is, that's the sort of scenario to head towards. I think, funny enough, the fifth lesson of Build a Better Network is all around keeping in touch. And one of the challenges I set is to say, just take a blank sheet of paper and write down the names of 5 people that you have fallen out of touch with, but have missed in some way. You've missed their company, you missed your conversations. You'd love to know what they're up to and resolve to reconnect with them. So I think for me, so many of the things I've started have been as a result of reading about problems in the newspapers, surprise, surprise. So for me, carving out that time to just reflect a bit on what I'm working on, what I want to be working on, taking time to tune into what others are doing, and then taking time for my brain to be sparked by other problems worth solving around the world, almost inevitably leads to sparks across my network. And I just think, for me, just very briefly, Megan, I think it's helpful. I think there are some super quick, I'll be super quick ways to keep in touch. You can notice what someone's doing. Morning, Helen, I noticed you doing that breakfast seminar. I couldn't make it, but I'll catch it later. Yeah, you can offer information about something they're doing. Yeah, I saw you're working more on micromobility. You might be interested on this article from Philadelphia. You can offer to help in some way. Is that, the name of somebody, an introduction? You can give feedback on something they're working on. Just notice what they're doing. And finally, and I do put it finally, you can ask to reconnect, to have a conversation, to meet them, to exchange messages. In other words, most of those options for keeping in touch with people don't involve more than about 30 seconds, a minute of your time. And it's just a light way to reconnect with the world. So setting aside even 10 minutes a day to do that, I think is really, really powerful.
Brilliant. And I think that you've answered Robert's question. He talked about wanting to build a local network. And in the past, he connected from chats and events at meetings, but how to do that online and what other methods are available. So I think you've touched on that. And when we open it up, if Robert, if you want to discuss more, let's do that. There's just one more question I want to get to before we open it up for everyone to come on and connect. Barry has said, how about networking at events, excluding COVID lockdowns? It's hard to barge in on a discussion between 2, 3, 4 people when you want to join in to make contact with one or more of them. So how do you do that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that the best ones are the pairs of people that shouldn't really be talking to each other. I don't mean they're being mischievous. I just mean they're probably colleagues or friends that have known each other for a long time. So you can sense, back to reading body language, you can often sense at an event the people who are locked in vibrant conversation versus the people who are simply shooting the breeze. And it's those pairs that can be most easy to approach. Groups of 3 are great because you can often, sounds like a David Attenborough documentary, but you can often pick one of the group of 3 off on those groups of 3. But again, calling out what you're doing, a bit like saying, I'm sorry it's been 2 years, I feel bad. Don't be afraid to say, do you mind if I join you? do you mind if I introduce myself? It feels a bit odd the first few times you do it, and it gets so much more natural. You will know by instinct if that's not the appropriate environment to butt into. So there's a thought there about getting more from that. And my top tip for physical networking events, and it applies virtually as well. Clubhouse has a button that's leave quietly. It's quite a good motto, isn't it? But they don't be afraid to say goodbye to people at physical events. It's been great to meet you. I'd like to keep in touch, and perhaps I'll see you later on in the event. You know, really powerful thing to say, can triple the number of interesting people you meet. Again, going back to the physical environment, and don't be afraid to ask who's going to be there before the event. Some event organizers will let you know. And don't be afraid in the physical event environment to ask who the host is. So in this event, I would have been corresponding with Helen or with Megan. I might say to the people on the front desk, dishing out the badges or the lanyards, I'm looking forward to meeting Helen. Is she here? Or Megan, is she here? They'll point the host out in the room. After you've met the host, you can make a beeline at the right point to them, compliment them on the event and the effort they must have gone to organize it, and ask them a nice open question saying, stakeholders seems like a really interesting group. Do you mind telling me the sort of people who are here? A proud host will then point out some of their favorite people and superstars within the room. And then within 2 little chess moves, you're having a much better conversation than if you just ambled in with a glass of something and a fistful of crisps.
Unbelievable. What little nuggets of gold you have shared with us today. And I think everyone will be itching to get their hands on your Build a Better Network brain dump, as you called it. I'm going to ask Helen to come on the line now and start letting people into the room. And as she's doing that, Ollie, I just want to thank you so much for today. It has been
thank you. I loved it.
A real privilege to have you, provide us with such pearls of wisdom. That I know.
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, I would say as well, I loved, you gave me a sneak peek of the sort of people that were joining us. And I think it's a great group. So I hope to properly cross paths with people afterwards, please.
Absolutely. I think that was also one of the questions, saying, what's the best way of connecting with you? How can we connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm Ollie at olliebarrett.com. That's my personal site, olliebarrett.com. And the course is buildabetter.network. And I am on Twitter with my full name, Ollie Barrett, and of course on LinkedIn. So yeah, if I've sparked an idea, then please let's keep in touch. And I will now shut up, much to some people's relief, because I know there are lots of connections waiting to be made. But can I just say, Megan, thank you. Dermot Hill, thank you. And Helen, this was amazingly organized. So thank you for all the hard work behind the scenes, and let the conversation commence.
Always compliment the host, hey, Ollie. That was my favourite line. I'm just, sorry, I've got a few more. I've got about 14 more people to just move into the room. So just while I finish doing that, the idea behind this, everyone, just while I am, is that obviously it's a networking event. So we decided a little bit last minute that it would be nice to get you all on to see who else was interested in this event. The first thing we'd like to start talking about is the best tools for networking that you find. I know Ollie's gone over a few different options, including Clubhouse, but would anyone like to kick us off with what options, what tools they use for networking, and whether they've worked for you during lockdown as well as in sort of before the past year? Would anyone like to kick us off with that?
Yeah, I'll start. I use LinkedIn messaging a lot.
LinkedIn messaging, that's really good. Yeah, and do you use that yourself, or do you have someone who does it on your behalf?
Yeah, I'll have one of my people talk to your people. No, I do it personally.
That's great.
I'm always somewhat cynical about, footballers who seem to be extremely erudite on Twitter. When you hear them after the match and they can barely string a sentence together.
Absolutely. And has anyone used any networking LinkedIn groups at all? It's something stakeholders are thinking of doing. We have a stakeholders page, but there are also other groups you can use, sort of more spotlighted groups where conversations hopefully can flow a little bit more easier. Has anyone used those spotlight groups at all to their advantage? Stuart?
Yeah, I'm from my charity Heropreneurs. I have a LinkedIn group, but it's pretty lousy, to be honest. But what I do, the thing that really works is everybody wants to join. I send them an email saying, sorry, the LinkedIn group is lousy, but please sign up to the newsletter. And if you want to be a mentor or a mentee, go to the website. And the click through or the success rate of that's amazing. But the groups people don't tend to use much.
I like the fact you sort of use a bit of humour in there as well. It's something I noticed, Ollie, when you were talking. You know, you mentioned you had little snippets of humour in what you were saying about the sourdough and things like that. And do you find, Ollie, just bring you back in, that is really helpful when you're making and keeping those connections, just to make people laugh? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Ollie. Could you unmute there?
Oh, I need to take myself. Yeah, love Heropreneurs, by the way. If we can give the course to the Heropreneurs, then it'll be my honor. Yeah, I just want to know who people are, really. I think, you know, I see Chris Hall. I'm thinking he looks friendly, doesn't he? I'd love to know what keeps him busy when he's not probably investing in things and conquering the world. You know, I'm just intrigued by people. So it's just sparking that, isn't it? I just think, you know, I'm very lucky, Helen. I get to work with people I like and enjoy their company. So for me, the quicker I can broaden that out, the better. So does that sometimes lead to unfiltered things being said? Maybe, but in a way, it's what you'd say to your colleagues. You know, golden rule: don't make them feel uncomfortable. Yeah, it's just about meeting people, not business cards.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the personal touch, isn't it?
Here comes Chris. This is good.
Okay.
Hi, Ollie. I'll follow up on your messages and tips, and it'll be great to connect. I mean, very briefly, I live on the Isle of Man. So I've got a great network here on the Isle of Man and love doing startups and entrepreneurs, but also love interacting with people in the big city. So yeah,
amazing. And you led the way on Bubbles, didn't you, in the Isle of Man?
We did. We actually, you may have seen the news yesterday. We were all down the pub last night.
I know, and all the photos saying it's back to normal, but we couldn't quite work out whether that was a shaming thing. But you should be proud of it. It's amazing.
Anyway, thanks for your tips. They were great.
Thanks, Chris. Stuart, you had your hand up. Would you like to comment?
Sorry, yeah, that was just me accidentally pressing something. But the thing I will add is I have been using Lunch Club for about 9 months now, just kind of once a week. Some, you know, mostly random conversations, but getting me out of my, you know, my current sort of headspace, which has been great. And what it's also reminded me and retrained me to do is think, well, wait a minute, I'm having a conversation with somebody random. Why don't I go back to my own contacts and actually get in touch with somebody I know I already like? So that's been really good.
That's great. Thank you, Stuart. Has anyone made any very useful contacts and connections over the past year that they'd like to share with us, and how they went about doing that?
I don't mind sharing. I actually went back to my old network of when I was in the Navy. They have a website, well, not a website, but they have a page on LinkedIn. And I'm actually now working with four of them, 2 in Italy, 1 in Japan, and 1 here in the UK. And it's just been great. It's been great to see people that I haven't seen in 30 years, and to see, you know, where they've gone with life, family, kids, and everything else. But the next thing was, you know, it was great to find like-minded people where we can sort of collaborate on a project. And it was amazing. And I've discovered that, you know, there's a lot of people out there that, frankly, you know, they're very interesting, and it's great to know them.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Zale. Yeah, I think there is a lot of value for going through the old LinkedIn groups. We actually had an investor social just before Christmas, and just right at the end of the event, one of the chaps that was online said, "Are you Joe Bloggs or whoever it was that was on there, who I think we used to go to school together?" And so then they went off and had a nice discussion after the event. But it is just these amazing connections. It's kind of a can-do attitude, like, let's just give it a go. Don't ask, don't get kind of positivity that you need, I think, certainly over the last year. Would anyone else like to share any stories that they've had from connections
Helen,
made?
that was me.
Oh, hi, Zafar.
And I found that Sher Khan actually lives only 3 or 4 miles away from me. And then we met up. And of course, I have to add, appropriately socially distanced. I had a fantastic time. And there's the social side aside, there's some other stuff that may come out of it as well. So
oh, that's fantastic.
just about of overcoming your shyness, putting your hands up and say, don't I know you from somewhere? Anyway.
Oh, that's great that you did that, and I'm so pleased the connection has carried on past the event. That's brilliant. Thank you, Zafar. Anyone else? Hi there, Kieran.
Hi, yeah, hi. I really enjoyed listening to Ollie there and to the panel. Slightly different, not a connection I've made recently, but a method that I've used that's without question been significantly more effective for me, which is I've worked on a sort of sequential series of meetings with one particular contact who undertook to help me get introductions. And we spoke a lot about, worked through a long list of connections they were prepared to make an introduction to. And I picked out those that I felt were appropriate for the purpose I had in mind. And then they would make the introduction. And in every case, I'd get a meeting or a conversation. And they understood exactly what I was pursuing, and always would give me 1-2 more names then to get in touch with afterwards. And, you know, I mean, knowing what questions you want to ask, if it's a very focused networking ambition, it's extremely important to be well prepared, to have 2 or 3 things you're going to take away. And usually the most important thing is, will you be introduced to 1 or 2 more people? You're asking, who can you introduce me to in this particular space? Or I'd like to learn more about that. Who do you think I might speak to, and would you make the introduction? So, and it was particularly effective for me in recent times. So I'll just offer that.
Thank you so much, Kieran. That's absolutely wonderful. We're actually at 11:30 now, which is when we said we'd stop. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. In particular, Ollie, of course, thank you for joining us today, and for all coming on and just getting through the little bit of discussion at the end. It's been really useful.
Thank you, Helen. And thanks, Megan, as well, for making it so easy. Thank you.
Very welcome. So next week we have another event. We are welcoming sustainable entrepreneur Tim Sandford, his venture New Unlimited, on our platform, and he's being joined by all the way from New Zealand an academic called Jacqueline Roworth, and they'll be having an open discussion on the truths and misconceptions surrounding sustainable investing, particularly in the food industry. So you'll get all the details about that event and all our other upcoming events in the email that you'll receive tomorrow. So just to close off this event, I thought I'd leave you with an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. So do stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Have a nice day.